The king of pop is still collecting checks bigger than most living artists will ever see. A catalog so valuable that Sony paid over $700 million just to own half of it. A real estate portfolio spread across California that his estate has been quietly managing and growing for 15 years since he passed, and a brand that generates more money per year now than it did when he was alive. Michael Jackson does not just own Hollywood from the grave. He runs it. Michael Jackson grew up in Gary, Indiana in a house so small that 9 people shared it. His father, Joe Jackson, ran the family with an iron fist and a leather belt. Rehearsals were mandatory. Mistakes were punished physically. There was no version of growing up in that house where you developed a relaxed relationship with performing, because performing was survival, and survival required perfection. What Joe Jackson did was brutal and well documented. What he also did unintentionally was create the most disciplined performing artist who ever lived. Michael Jackson practiced with the obsessive focus of someone who had learned early that not being good enough had consequences. That standard never left him even after he had nothing left to prove to anyone. The Jackson 5 moved to Los Angeles in 1971 when Michael was 13 years old. They signed with Motown first and then Epic Records. Michael watched how the music industry worked from the inside from the time he was a child. He watched how labels made money from artists. He watched how publishing rights worked. He watched how the people who owned the music made money long after the people who created it had stopped receiving anything significant. He decided he was not going to be on the wrong side of that equation. That decision made him one of the wealthiest entertainers in history, and it is the reason his empire is still generating wealth today. Everything you thought you knew about Michael Jackson's money is probably wrong. Stay with us. Neverland, the property that defined an era. Neverland Ranch sits in Los Olivos, California, in the Santa Ynez Valley north of Santa Barbara. 2,700 acres of land in one of the most beautiful stretches of California wine country. Michael bought it in 1988 for approximately $19 million when Thriller had already made him the most famous person on earth. He renamed it Neverland after the Peter Pan story that he had been obsessed with since childhood. The name was not just whimsical. It reflected something real about how Michael Jackson experienced his own life. He had never had a childhood. He had been performing professionally since he was 5 years old. Neverland was the childhood he built for himself with adult money. What he built there was extraordinary and slightly insane in the best possible way. The main house was a 35-room Elizabethan-style mansion, not one of those celebrity mansions that looks like a hotel lobby and functions as a background for photographs. A house that was actually lived in, thought about, built around the specific tastes and needs of one very specific person. The property had its own amusement park, full-size rides, a Ferris wheel, a merry-go-round, a roller coaster, bumper cars, operating rides maintained and staffed as if they were in a public theme park, except they existed on private land for Michael and whoever he invited. He used them, not occasionally. He rode those rides regularly and invited children from hospitals and disadvantaged backgrounds to come to Neverland and spend days at the amusement park at no cost. There was a full zoo on the property, giraffes, elephants, an orangutan named Bubbles who became arguably the most famous primate since Curious George, a private train that ran a circuit around the property, a movie theater that seated 50 people, a flower clock so large it was visible from the road, a lake. He spent over $35 million in renovations and additions after buying the property. By the time Neverland was finished, it was not a home. It was its own private world. The property was put into foreclosure in 2008 when Michael was in serious financial difficulty. He had borrowed heavily against the property and was struggling to service the debt. Colony Capital, a real estate investment firm, bought the debt and saved the property from auction. Michael never returned to live there after the legal troubles of 2005. After his death in 2009, his estate eventually sold the property. It went through several ownership changes and significant legal complications before being rebranded as Sycamore Valley Ranch. The property sold in 2022 for approximately $22 million, less than Michael paid for it in 1988 in nominal terms, though what had been built on it in the intervening decades was worth multiples of that. The Neverland story is a complicated one financially, but it is impossible to tell the story of Michael Jackson's California empire without it, because Neverland represents something fundamental about who he was. He did not buy land as an investment. He bought it to build a world. The Hayvenhurst Estate, where the family still lives. While Neverland got all the attention, the property that has remained within the Jackson family continuously, and that represents the most stable piece of Michael's California real estate legacy, is the Hayvenhurst Estate in Encino. The Havenhurst property in the San Fernando Valley was where the Jackson family relocated after leaving Gary, Indiana. The family bought it in the early 70s, and it has been Jackson family property ever since. Michael contributed significantly to the property over the years, funding renovations, adding structures, improving the grounds, and it became a genuinely significant estate. The main compound sits on 2.5 acres in Encino. A large main house with multiple bedrooms, a guest house, a recording studio that Michael used for private work, separate from his commercial studio sessions, a pool, a basketball court, and the kind of mature landscaping that only exists on a property that has been maintained and developed for decades. After Michael's death, the estate remained in the Jackson family. His mother, Catherine Jackson, lived there. The property continued to be maintained and is estimated to be worth well over $10 million based on comparable Encino estate sales in recent years. The Havenhurst property represents the family side of Michael's California real estate, the place that was home in the most fundamental sense before Neverland and throughout all of it. Michael Jackson had a recording studio at his family home in Encino, separate from all his commercial work, just practicing, just creating, on his own time. Sub and like if you want to keep these stories coming. The Sony/ATV catalog, the smartest deal in music history. Here is where the real money is. Here is where Michael Jackson's California empire becomes something that genuinely changes how you understand the music business. In 1985, Michael Jackson paid $47 million for ATV Music Publishing. ATV was a catalog that contained approximately 250,000 songs, including a significant portion of the Beatles' songwriting catalog, the Lennon-McCartney compositions that are among the most valuable pieces of intellectual property in the history of recorded music. Paul McCartney had advised Michael to invest in music publishing. McCartney himself had famously lost the rights to his own songs to ATV years earlier. He told Michael that publishing was where the real money was. Michael listened, then outbid McCartney himself when ATV came up for sale. McCartney was understandably not thrilled about this. Michael paid $47 million. Within a decade, the catalog was worth hundreds of millions. In 1995, he merged ATV with Sony's music publishing division to create Sony/ATV Music Publishing, the largest music publishing company in the world at the time of the merger. Michael received cash and retained 50% ownership of the combined entity. Sony/ATV published the Beatles catalog, the Bob Dylan catalog, the Rolling Stones catalog, Taylor Swift's early catalog, and hundreds of thousands of other songs. Every time any of those songs was played on radio, used in a film or television show, performed at a concert, or streamed online, Sony/ATV collected a royalty, and Michael owned half of it. In 2016, 7 years after Michael's death, Sony exercised its option to buy Michael's 50% stake in Sony/ATV. The estate sold the stake for $750 million, for a catalog he bought for $47 million in 1985. That is one of the greatest individual investment returns in the history of the music industry. But here is what most people miss. Even after selling Sony/ATV, the Michael Jackson estate retained ownership of MJJ Music, Michael's personal publishing company that holds the rights to his own songs, the songs he wrote himself. Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, Rock With You, Billie Jean, Beat It, Man in the Mirror, Thriller, Black or White, Heal the World. MJJ Music generates tens of millions of dollars in royalties every single year. Every time Thriller plays in a store in October, every time Billie Jean gets cleared for a film, every time a streaming platform pays for the rights to include his music. MJJ is still there, still collecting, still generating, and the estate owns it completely. The record label, MJJ Productions. Michael Jackson was not just an artist on a label, he owned his own production company. MJJ Productions was the entity through which he produced his own recordings, and through which he had negotiated some of the most favorable artist deals in the history of the music industry. His deal with Epic Records, renegotiated multiple times over his career, eventually gave him royalty rates and ownership rights that no other artist had previously achieved. He fought for these terms specifically because he had watched from childhood how the music industry extracted value from artists while paying them a fraction of what the music generated. By the time of Thriller in 1982, his deal with Epic gave him ownership of the masters to his recordings after a certain period, meaning the actual recordings themselves, not just the publishing, would eventually revert to him. This was almost unheard of for a major label artist at that time. The value of those masters today is extraordinary. The Thriller album alone has sold over 66 million copies worldwide and continues to sell and stream every year. Bad, Dangerous, History. Each of these albums generates ongoing revenue from streaming, licensing, and sales that flows through MJJ Productions and ultimately to the estate. After his death, Sony Music has maintained the distribution and commercial relationship with the estate. The terms of these ongoing deals have not been fully disclosed, but industry analysts estimate the music side of Michael Jackson's estate generates between $75 and $150 million in revenue annually, some years significantly more. The year the MJ Broadway musical opened, the years associated with major documentary releases, anniversary campaigns around Thriller and other albums. This is not legacy revenue that is slowly declining. It is an actively managed and growing business. The estate has been extremely sophisticated in how it manages Michael Jackson's catalog and brand, choosing licensing deals selectively, pursuing unauthorized use aggressively, and creating new commercial contexts for the music that generate fresh revenue. revenue, $75 to $150 million a year, from a man who passed away in 2009. That number is not going down. Like and subscribe. These are the stories that need to reach more people. The Hidden Hills rental, Hollywood's most famous address. When Michael Jackson moved back to Los Angeles in 2006 after years of living primarily outside the United States, he rented a property in Hidden Hills, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in all of Los Angeles. Hidden Hills sits between Beverly Hills and Bel Air and contains some of the most valuable residential real estate in the country. The property he rented on Carolwood Drive was a French Normandy-style mansion sitting on a little over 1 acre. He rented it for around $100,000 per month because even at the height of his financial difficulties, his monthly expenses operated at a scale that most people cannot comprehend. This is the house where he died on June 25, 2009. The property subsequently sold for around $18 million and has been renovated significantly since. It exists today as a private residence with no public marker or memorial, just a house in Hidden Hills with a history that its current owner may or may not have known when they bought it. The Carolwood property is not part of Michael Jackson's estate or empire. He was renting it, but it is impossible to tell the California story without mentioning it because it was the final chapter of his California life. The brand, bigger now than when he was alive. Here is the part of the Michael Jackson empire that is genuinely hard to fully understand until you look at the numbers. The Michael Jackson brand, his image, his likeness, his name, his music, his story, generates more revenue per year now than it did at the peak of his active career. This is not something that happens with most deceased artists. Most estates slowly decline in revenue as the artist recedes from cultural relevance. Michael Jackson's estate has done the opposite. Forbes tracks celebrity estate earnings every year. Michael Jackson's estate has led the list in most years since his death. In some years, the estate has generated over $400 million in a single 12-month period. No other deceased entertainer is close. The licensing operation alone is extraordinary. Michael Jackson's image and likeness can be used in advertising, in merchandise, in entertainment contexts. Each use requires a license from the estate, and the estate charges accordingly. The rates are high because the brand is strong. The rates have stayed high because the estate has managed the brand carefully, rather than licensing it to anything that would pay. The Las Vegas residency deals that have been discussed and partially executed since his death. The Broadway musical MJ, the musical which opened on Broadway in 2022 and generated significant revenue across its run. The ongoing streaming performance of his catalog on Spotify, Apple Music, and other platforms where his monthly listener numbers remain in the tens of millions despite passing 15 years ago. Taylor Swift publicly complained about losing her masters. She lost them to Scooter Braun. Michael Jackson lost his early catalog but fought and bought his way into owning the most valuable music publishing portfolio in history. His story is the reason every serious artist today understands publishing rights in a way that artists did not understand them before he demonstrated what was at stake. The estate is managed by John Branca, Michael's longtime entertainment attorney, and John McClane, a music industry executive. These are serious operators running a serious business. They have made aggressive and largely successful decisions about how to manage and grow the Michael Jackson brand and catalog in the 15 years since his death. The complex in Calabasas beyond Neverland and Hayvenhurst. Michael Jackson had real estate interests in the Calabasas and Hidden Hills area of Los Angeles County, the same neighborhood that would later become famous for the Kardashian family and various other celebrities who valued the gated community privacy that the area provides. Property records indicate holdings in this area that have appreciated significantly as the neighborhood became one of the most sought-after addresses in the Los Angeles market. The Hidden Hills and Calabasas area went from being a relatively sleepy gated suburb to one of the most valuable residential zones in Southern California over the 2 decades following Michael's major purchases there. His estate has managed these properties as appreciating assets, in some cases maintaining them, in other cases selling at appropriate moments when the market provided strong returns. The real estate side of the estate has been managed with the same level of sophistication as the music and brand side. California real estate, particularly in the corridors where Michael Jackson was buying, Encino, Hidden Hills, Santa Ynez Valley, the Hidden Hills area, has been among the strongest performing real estate in the United States over the past 3 decades. Being in position in those markets before they fully appreciated has been a significant source of wealth creation for the estate. The Hidden Hills area became one of the most expensive zip codes in California. Michael Jackson was buying there before it blew up. What the estate is worth now. Let us put real numbers on what Michael Jackson's California empire is worth today. The MJJ music catalog, his own songs, still owned completely by the estate, is estimated to be worth between $900 million and $1.2 billion based on recent comparable music catalog transactions. The market for music catalogs has been extraordinarily strong over the past 5 years, with major catalogs trading at multiples of their annual earnings that were unimaginable a decade ago. The remaining real estate holdings in California are estimated at tens of millions of dollars across the various properties the estate maintains. The brand licensing operation generates tens of millions millions per year in licensing fees for use of his image and likeness. The music royalties from MJJ and from the ongoing streaming and sales of his recordings generate tens of millions per year. The theatrical and entertainment projects, Broadway, potential film projects, international touring productions, generate significant additional revenue in the years they operate. The total estate value has been estimated by various financial analysts at between $1 and $2 billion, with ongoing annual revenue in the range of $75 to $150 million, depending on the year and what major projects are active. This is the empire, not the Neverland rides, not the Bubbles the chimp, not the sequined glove in a glass case, the publishing rights, the master recordings, the brand that keeps generating because the music keeps connecting. Michael Jackson understood something about ownership that most artists in his generation did not understand until it was too late. He understood that the performance was the product, but the publishing was the asset, that the touring was the income, but the catalog was the wealth, that what you owned outlasted what you earned. He was right. And 15 years after his death, his estate is still proving it every single quarter when the royalty checks arrive. From a 2-bedroom house in Gary, Indiana, where 9 people lived, to a 2,700-acre ranch in the Santa Ynez Valley. From a child performer who watched the music industry extract value from artists, to the man who bought the Beatles catalog for $47 million and watched it become worth billions. Michael Jackson still owns Hollywood, not metaphorically. Through publishing rights and master recordings and licensing deals, and a brand that generates over $100 million a year, the most valuable parts of his empire are invisible. You cannot photograph them or fly a drone over them. They live in copyright registrations and licensing agreements and streaming royalty reports. But they are more real than any mansion, and they will outlast every building he ever owned. Which part of Michael Jackson's empire surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. Share this if it changed how you think about music ownership. Subscribe to the channel. We will see you in the next one.